developments concerning political appointments and government formation. Now, following the ratification of electoral results, the parliamentary speaker and his 2 deputies were elected on January 9. While this was initially contested, the Federal Supreme Court ruled on January 25 that the inaugural parliamentary session during which the speaker and his 2 deputies were elected was held in accordance with the Constitution. The next step is the election of a President of the Republic, according to the Constitution, within 30 days of the election of the Speaker. However, and following an initial nomination period, on February 7, the parliamentary quorum for a session to elect a president was not met. Parliament decided to reopen the nomination period for another 3 days. The Federal Supreme Court has not yet ruled on whether this reopening was constitutional, but did rule one candidate ineligible. Now, once the president is elected, he or she will, within 15 days, according to the Constitution, charge the nominee of the largest parliamentary bloc, that is the Prime Minister designate, with the formation of a Council of Ministers to be endorsed by Parliament. Well, clearly the current situation suggests that we are not there yet. And while political consultations continue, or perhaps more accurately, the political impasse continues, time just passes by, precious time. Mr. President, behind the headline debate of a majority versus consensus government, many Iraqis increasingly wonder whether the national interest is actually front and center in the ongoing negotiations, rather than access to resources and power, or how the pie of political appointments and ministries will be carved this time around. Needless to say, the priority should be to urgently agree on a program of action that immediately and meaningfully tackles Iraq's long list of outstanding domestic business. So what I'm saying is the elections are over 4 months behind us, and it is high time to return the spotlight where it deserves to be, on the people of Iraq. The people of Iraq who continue to wait for gainful, productive employment opportunities, for safety and security, for adequate public service delivery, for the full protection of their rights and freedoms, for justice and accountability, for meaningful participation of women and youth, to name but a few. Of course, one could be forgiven for being patient with a prolonged government formation phase if we were witnessing vibrant exchanges on policy orientations, on development pathways and economic reform plans. If that was animating the negotiations, then indeed patience would be a virtue. However, so far we are observing quite the opposite, hampering the change and reforms the country so desperately needs. Moreover, and as I've pointed out countless times, a weak home front creates vulnerabilities. To Daesh, for instance, ready to take advantage of any political and security vacuum, but also to continued external interference. In the case of Iraq, not a hypothetical point. Now, in the meantime, the patience of the Iraqi people is being tested. In October 2019, this patience found its limits, and many Iraqis took to the streets, protesting a lack of socio-economic and political prospects. We know how that ended. Hundreds killed, thousands injured. The very least Iraqis may expect now is a sense of urgency from their elected representatives. A sense of urgency to overcome internal divisions, to agree on a program informing Iraqis on what they can expect in the next 4 years, to manage public expectations and to rise to the challenge of meeting the aspirations of the 40 million people who call Iraq home. Mr. President, a few words on the Baghdad-Erbil relationship. As you know, I have consistently emphasized the importance of a regular, structured and institutionalized Baghdad-Erbil dialogue with specific timelines to address the long outstanding issues. And as I've said before, this is a mutual responsibility. Fact is that the inability to overcome differences or even the unwillingness to find agreements, it comes sooner or later at a cost. Also true, if a political vacuum exists for too long, the judicialization of what are otherwise legislative or executive domains can suddenly be a fact of life. Now, with a caretaker government in office and political parties engaged in negotiations on the formation of a new government, a federal Supreme Court case pending for 10 years was very recently adjudicated. Hence, this recent court ruling on the unconstitutionality of the KRG oil and gas law prompted questions by many, such as, why now? Fact is, it happened. Consequently, the importance of this institutionalized dialogue has only increased. And not only that, the country needs its parliament to act. More broadly, what I'm saying is, letting things slide is risky business, with potentially far-reaching consequences undermining Iraq's stability in the short and long run. So once again, I call on all stakeholders to focus on what really matters, to unite instead of competing. Like it or not, but parties need each other to be their best. Hence, all efforts should center on resolving outstanding issues not by way of a power grab, but in a spirit of partnership and cooperation. Turning briefly to the economy, between a sharp rise in oil prices and a currency devaluation, the deficit has been reduced and foreign currency reserves have grown. The safety net has been expanded, notably due to increased spending on social services in response to the pandemic. Now, at first glance, this can sound encouraging, but there is no denying it, with important government proposals and efforts actively being undermined, delayed or halted, these results cannot be considered a direct consequence of sustainable strategies. Fundamentally, Iraq today is no less vulnerable to commodity price fluctuations. Iraq suffers no less from poverty or underemployment, and Iraq witnesses no less corruption than it did last year or the year before. I again repeat myself, but durable structural solutions can only come through meaningful reform. And yes, this is easier said than done. I realize that. However, Iraq is running out of time. As an Iraqi official put it to me some time ago, even if we had started implementing the most urgent reforms the day before yesterday, it will take suprahuman efforts to sufficiently address today's financial, economic, and environmental challenges. And while I'd like to think in the terms of the glass half full, his remarks are not to be taken lightly. Also, with regards to environmental challenges, they present a looming threat that is far too often considered less urgent, but it's ultimately one of the greatest global challenges we collectively face. A few weeks ago, I visited Iraq's marshlands in southern Iraq, dramatic, beautiful landscape, whose biodiversity is equaled only by its cultural significance. However, water scarcity in this region is not just a threat on the horizon. It is a present danger. As is the case for other parts of the country, desalinization of water and soils, desertification, and the disappearance of arable land are nothing less than existential environmental concerns. Moreover, water scarcity, as we all know, is a threat multiplier. With it come heightened risks of poverty, displacement, instability, and conflict. Now, much, but not all of this scarcity can be explained by climate change. Water flows are also actively being reduced by neighboring countries. Further, potable water and irrigation infrastructure and maintenance are significantly lagging behind. Iraq's water resources have been ineffectively managed for too long. In other words, Iraq is acutely vulnerable to the effects of water scarcity due to climate change and reduced inflows from its rivers. While I know that this is a priority for the current caretaker government, I would like to emphasize that shared ownership of this crucial file across the political spectrum will prove essential. Mr. President, something else. Camps and prisons across the border hosting many Iraqis in northeastern Syria, to be precise. All of us will have closely followed recent events that have made the risks associated with this slow-moving catastrophe yet again clear. The situation in these camps and prisons presents unprecedented challenges. with implications for the region and far beyond, ticking time bombs. Over the past 3 years, you've heard me repeat that the legacy of yesterday's fight against Daesh could very easily turn into tomorrow's war, that we should not wait for young children to come of age in a camp like Al-Hol. These children, living in dire circumstances, never asked to be part of this mess. However, they find themselves deprived of their rights. These children find themselves at risk of forced recruitment and exposure to violent extremism. Now, of course, I recognize that a number of states have upheld their responsibilities by taking back children, and in some cases also limited numbers of women. And I can only hope that other states will soon follow suit. As a growing number of countries have shown, this can be done successfully. Fact is, the current situation is not sustainable, and keeping people indefinitely in the restricted and poor conditions of these camps ultimately creates greater protection and security risks than taking them back in a controlled manner. Meanwhile, Iraq has demonstrated courage. So far, around 450 families, or some 1,800 persons, have been repatriated to Iraq. And as thousands of Iraqis are still out there, the Iraqi authorities do realize that they cannot stop there. Now, Mr. President, turning from Al-Hol camp to the suspected ISIL combatants currently in custody in northeastern Syria, again, an unsustainable situation. Moreover, and as is the case for a camp like Al-Hol, these facilities fuel resentment and also inspire terrorists, from breakout operations to large-scale attacks, as we have seen. Also, the fact that some fighters and associated family members have been able to make their way out suggests it would be better to control the situation and manage returns, rather than take the chance of missing them as they slip back undetected into any country. Also here, Iraq deserves to be commended. The Iraqi government did not only make a start with the repatriation of Iraqi families in Al-Hol, it has also begun repatriating Iraqi ISIL combatants. Essentially what I'm saying is, in the interest of everyone, the ultimate security argument, as opposed to the short-term political one, is to recognize that a continued status quo is the riskiest option. Now, to appease festering grievances, to prevent the emergence of new conflicts, and to defuse ticking time bombs, it is important to anticipate and mitigate. It is important to step up and get things done. Mr. President, turning now to the issue of missing Kuwaiti third country nationals and missing Kuwaiti property, including the National Archives. On February 16, UNAMI facilitated the return from Kuwait back to Iraq. We facilitated the return of the last 6 human remains that were determined not to be part of the Kuwait or Saudi Arabia lists of missing persons. With this transfer, the identification process of all human remains discovered in Samoa and Muthana Governorate in 2019 and 2020 has been concluded. As I've stressed before, it is imperative for the government of Iraq not to lose this momentum, but instead to take advantage of the experience gained so far, and thus to move towards the overall conclusion of this important humanitarian file. Mr. President, in closing, let me reiterate the importance of a sense of urgency. It is urgent for Iraq's political leaders to overcome divisions, to put aside partisanship, and to bury personal vendettas. You know, Iraq truly has immense potential. If only this potential were fulfilled, how bright Iraq's future could be. Thank you so much, Mr. President.
Yeah, благодарю.
I thank Ms. Hennis-Plasschaert for her briefing. I now give the floor to those council members who wish to make statements. Firstly, I give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Special Representative Hennis-Plasschaert, for your briefing and for your ongoing leadership on this critical file. We truly appreciate UNAMI's support to Iraq's peace and stability, and I welcome Iraqi permanent representative to this meeting today. The United States again congratulates the Iraqi people for successfully holding free and fair parliamentary elections in October that were largely peaceful. This is a testament to the Iraqi people and their desire for transparent and good governance. We remain hopeful that these elections will yield a government that reflects the will of the Iraqi people and respond to their urgent needs. Before and after polling, the Iraqi people rejected violence intended to coerce and intimidate politicians, election authorities, journalists, women, and activists. They rebuffed attempts by some to restore old power structures. They stayed strong in solidarity for democracy. The attack on the residence of Prime Minister al-Kahimi in November was the most visible attempt to thwart the democratic process and nullify the election results amid repeated threats of violence directed against Iraqi citizens working to safeguard Iraq's democracy. Despite all these threats, the Independent High Electoral Commission, with assistance from UNAMI, implemented a secure, technically sound voting and counting process monitored by international observers. After electoral and judicial authorities confirmed the vote tallies and adjudicated challenges, the Federal Supreme Court in December ratified the election results, paving the way for Iraq to proceed with forming a new government. As a result of these polls, an historic number of women and members of religious and ethnic minority groups won seats. Reformist newcomers have established themselves as a new force in Iraqi politics. Democracy has gained a stronger foothold in Iraq. Now it's time for Iraq's leaders to come together and form an inclusive government, one capable of and committed to addressing the aspirations of the Iraqi people. The Iraqi people need this government because they need security. We have seen that ISIS remains bent on using violence to wreak havoc. In the meantime, we commend Iraq's security forces for their brave fight against ISIS and will continue to support Iraq in this effort in line with our strategic framework agreement. The United States looks forward to working with the new government once it has formed to strengthen our strategic partnership on our many shared interests, including economic reform and anti-corruption measures. Inclusive and transparent institutions and systems, including the judiciary, are critical to the next government's formation and to Iraq's future. I was proud to see Iraq participate in the Summit for Democracy in December. Now it's time for Iraq's leaders to meet those commitments and set an example for the world. Thank you, Mr. President.
Я благодарю представителя.
I thank the representative of the United States for her statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Albania.
Thank you, Mr. President. Let me begin by thanking Janine Hennis-Plasschaert for her briefing and welcome Iraqi representative to this meeting. We express our appreciation for the work that has been done to address the questions of missing Kuwaiti and third country nationals and missing Kuwaiti property. Very important progress has been made on this file, and we recognize its significance. Mr. President, the certification of the election results by the Federal Court in December last year represents a critical step towards the consolidation of democracy in Iraq. It has set in motion the constitutional process that should be followed by the election of a new Speaker of the Parliament and new government. We regret to see that this constitutional process has been put on hold, especially after the postponement of the vote on the election of the new president by the Parliament on the 7th February 2022. The largest political parties should take the responsibility and move the country forward by allowing for the formation of a new and able government to meet the immediate challenges that the Iraqi people face. We cannot emphasize enough the importance of full and meaningful participation of women in this process as the best guarantors of an all-inclusive and representative government. Equally, we see a need for the major forces to look beyond sectarian lines and unite their forces to serve the common good of all Iraqis. Dialogue among the relevant parties and levels is the only way to achieve this common goal. Mr. President, we remain concerned about the high levels of political violence, and these are acts on the democratic future of Iraq and must be condemned. All parties must avoid the use of threat or violence to resolve political disputes. Dialogue, not violence, must be the way to form a government that can address the economic, climate, humanitarian challenges while also fighting the pandemic. Mr. President, I represent a young democracy that has made immense achievements, and we have experienced firsthand how the democratic processes can be slow, and that is not something that can be taken for granted or something that comes easily. Respecting constitutional principles and deadlines is critical to ensure the democratic rule, especially in a country that is facing so many challenges. It is in the spirit of friendship and sincere desire to see Iraq flourish that we call on all parties to redouble their efforts to respect the constitutional process and resolve all outstanding issues through dialogue and negotiations. Thank you, Mr. President.
Я благодарю.
I thank the representative of Albania for her statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Gabon.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the A3, Gabon, Ghana, and Kenya. We thank the SRJ Janine Hennis Plachard for her informative briefing, which we have followed closely on development in Iraq and activities on the United Nations Assistance Mission in Iraq. We also welcome the participation of our colleague, the permanent representative of Iraq at this session. Our intervention will focus on the political, security, and human rights issues. Mr. President, it is apparent from the SRSG briefing that Iraq remains in the grip of post-electoral stalemate, which, due to the persistence of political dissensions, has resulted in an institutional crisis with the indefinite postponement of the election of the President of the Republic by Parliament, initially scheduled for 7 February 2022. The announcement in May 2020 of the holding of early parliamentary election presented a source of hope for the Iraqi people, especially young people who during their demonstration essentially demanded the establishment of the rule of law, the end of external interference, as well as a fairer and more effective economic and social policy. With the support of UNAMI, the legislative election of 10 October 2021 were held peacefully, although the announcement of the result was marred by tension that led to electoral disputes. The willingness of all political actors to remain within the framework of the Constitution demonstrated their commitment to peace and stability in Iraq, which gave rise to optimism. However, the post-electoral stalemate and the inability of political parties to come to an agreement does not serve to Iraqi people who exercise their constitutional right for leadership and prosperity. We call on the various political parties represented in Parliament to engage in dialogue and compromise to achieve the formation of a consensus government. We similarly call for the refraining from all forms of violence and the need for a peaceful and expeditious formation of government that is capable of addressing the challenges facing Iraq. The future of the country is at stake. We recall with satisfaction the significant participation of women in the recent election, which won 95 seats, exceeding the 25% quota provided for in the Constitution, which was a clear illustration of the inclusive nature of this election. This outcome should result in the significant representation of women in the formation of the government and in the Iraqi society in general, which we urge the government of Iraq to prioritize. We also take this opportunity to reiterate our support for the law against domestic violence, which seeks to protect women. On the security front, the A3 remains deeply concerned about the continued attacks being perpetrated by Daesh in several governorates of Iraq against civilian and Iraqi security forces and the persistent threat they pose to security and stability in the country. Ensuring the safety and security of Iraqis is fundamental to the overall stability, reconciliation, and prosperity we desire to see in Iraq. In this context, we reaffirm our support for the security of Iraq and the fight against terrorism and join in the call to address the underlying factors that are conducive to the spread of terrorism and violent extremism. In recalling the recent violent attacks carried out on January 21st by Daesh in the district of Al-Azim, in which 11 soldiers were killed, we must hold the perpetrator of such crime whose activity affects the entire region to account. In addition, manned and unexploded bombs are among the greatest challenges facing the Iraqi authorities in enabling the displaced to return to their homes in the liberated areas of the north of the country, particularly in the provinces of Nineveh and Kirkuk. To illustrate this, a child was killed again on 19 February in explosion of a landmine in Dhikar province. We call on the international community to support Iraq in its fight against this scourge. On the human rights situation in Iraq, we note the activities being undertaken by UNAMI, together with other stakeholders, to promote human rights and build capacity on issues of justice, accountability, and rule of law in Iraq. We reiterate the call for the government of Iraq to take further measures to hold persons accountable for human rights violations and abuses against demonstrators and civil society actors. For example, in the period from 1st October to 31st December 2021, UNAMI documented 28 incidents involving nearly 115 civilians, including 50 deaths and 65 injuries, including women and children. These barbaric acts are attributed both to Daesh and to unidentified armed militias. In this vein, we welcome the release of the joint report of UNAMI and UNHCR, Human Rights and Freedom Trial in the Kurdistan region, which examines the criminal proceeding in 4 emblematic cases tried by the Erbil Criminal Court. We acknowledge and congratulate the effort of the government of Iraq with the support of the international community for the fulfillment of its obligation to Kuwait of the compensation and demanded by the United Nations Compensation Commission in accordance with Security Council Resolution 687 and 692. The same applies to Iraq's accession to the Paris Agreement, which is also a strong signal to be noted. We acknowledge UNAMI's continuous support for the efforts of the government of Iraq and Kuwait on the subject of missing Kuwaiti persons and third country nationals, as well as the work by the tripartite commissions and the ICRC. We applaud the recent advances made in including new initiatives for information that could help identify location of new burial sites and further encourage the government of Iraq to continue building upon the progress made in the search for missing Kuwaiti national archives. In conclusion, we reiterate our support for UNAMI and the agencies of the United Nations system for their continued and multifaceted support alongside the government and people of Iraq. Mr. President, time of the essence, we call all political actors to secure a political deal that accommodates the interests of all the parties in order to unlock the ongoing impasse. This is the only path to the country peaceful political transition that will safeguard the interests of the Iraqi people. I thank you very much.
Я благодарю
I thank the representative of Gabon. Speaking on behalf of the A3, I now give the floor to the representative of Brazil.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to begin by thanking Special Representative Janine Hennis-Plasschaert for her informative and insightful briefing. I would also like to welcome our Iraqi colleague to this meeting. Since this is the first briefing on the United Nations Assistance Mission for Iraq, UNAMI, in which we participate during our current mandate on the Security Council, we would like to reiterate Brazil's support for the historical work of the mission that the mission has undertaken since 2003. Throughout these last 2 decades, UNAMI has been essential in aiding Iraq in its efforts towards stability and development. UNAMI's work also holds a very specific meaning for us as Brazilians, as the creation on May 17, 2003, preceded in 5 days the Canal Hotel attack, which took the lives of 22 people at the UN headquarters in Baghdad, including that of Special Representative for Iraq and High Commission for Human Rights, Sergio Vieira de Mello. UNAMI's efforts since then honor their sacrifice and constitute a symbol of courage and determination in the pursuit of peace. Since 2003, the Iraqi people have faced immense challenges, from post-war reconstruction to the building of democratic institutions to the fight against terrorism. None of these challenges has been entirely gone away, but we have witnessed hard-earned and well-deserved progress in all of these fronts. Most recently, Iraq must be commended for the holding of safe, transparent, and well-organized elections on October 10, 2021. We applaud the efforts of the Iraqi Independent High Electoral Commission and other institutions in this regard, and we recognize the essential work of UNAMI in supporting the Iraqi state. This Council's decision to reinforce UNAMI's capabilities before the election was an opportune and fruitful one. The announcement of the final election results on November 30th and the ratification of these results by the Supreme Court in December 27 were important milestones, and we count on Iraqi political actors to capitalize on the moment and complete the government formation process as soon as possible in order to respond to the legitimate and urgent aspirations of Iraqi people. 2022 has seen important developments and achievements for Iraq, some of which have been recently discussed in this chamber. On Tuesday, we adopted a resolution recognizing that Iraq had fulfilled its obligations established under Article 7 of the Charter regarding the payment of compensation related to the events of 1990-1991. This was a momentous achievement. Accordingly, the resolution determined the forthcoming termination of the United Nations Compensation Commission after 3 decades of activity. As Iraq turns yet another page of its recent past, it also endeavors to fulfill its true vocation as a source of regional stability and as a bridge between different cultures, political outlooks, and religious perspectives. The Baghdad Conference for Cooperation and Partnership, held last August, is a promising example of this. The burgeoning ties of friendship and cooperation between Iraq and Kuwait are another. UNAMI's activities are essential for supporting positive trends in Iraq and for aiding the Iraqi government and the people as they face their current challenges. Special Representative Hennis Plasschaert, you can count on our continued support. I thank you, Mr. President.
Я благодарю.
I thank the representative of Brazil for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Norway.
Thank you, President. Let me begin by thanking SRG's Hennis Plasschaert for the briefing and also welcome the Iraqi PR to this meeting. It has been 4 months since the Iraqi people came together to vote in parliamentary elections. We look forward to the formation of a new government that will meet the needs and aspirations of the Iraqi people, in particular women, youth, and marginalized communities. It is vital that all Iraqi political actors take the necessary steps to form a government expeditiously. Let me also underline that the historic participation of women as candidates and voters, indeed surpassing the 25% constitutional quota, should be reflected in their meaningful leadership in the next government and cabinet. We also commend the intention of the Independent High Electoral Committee to conduct a post-election review. Such a lesson learned process is important for strengthening the capacities of Iraq's electoral institutions. President, the security situation in Iraq continues to be fragile and volatile. We are concerned by the continued terrorist attack by ISIL and spread of violent extremism. In this regard, we underline the importance of strengthening capacity on human rights compliance and adhering to the principle of proportionality during counterterrorism operations, while carefully considering the role of marginalization, exclusion, and injustice. We applaud UNAMI's support to the Iraqi authorities to strengthen their compliance. Furthermore, we are encouraged by the recent Secretary General's report on children and armed conflict in Iraq, which detailed the significant decrease in grave violation against children between 2019 and 2021. We are, however, deeply concerned by the sharp increase of children held in detention on security-related charges. Children should be treated primarily as victims. Alternatives to detention, such as long-term and sustainable reintegration, should be actively sought. It is clear that accountability, justice, rule of law, and human rights are at the center of addressing the long-term drivers of conflict and instability in Iraq. Norway would like to again raise the issue of strengthening accountability mechanisms for human rights violations and abuses, and in particular for violence perpetrated against demonstrators and political and civil society actors, as well as sexual and gender-based violence. In this regard, we commend the SRG for holding multiple roundtable meetings with government and civil society representatives, advancing support for the adoption and enactment of the draft anti-domestic violence law. Norway welcomes the ongoing implementation of climate change adoption activities in Iraq, a critical area of importance for furthering long-term stability in both Iraq and the region. We welcome the increased reporting on this issue in the most recent UNAMI report, as these efforts should be an inspiration for greater international and regional support for both Iraq and for other countries facing such challenges. Finally, let me turn to the relation between Baghdad and Erbil. We welcome willingness to cooperate on security. We urge the federal government and the Kurdistan regional government to further develop their dialogue to resolve outstanding issues and to promote increased cooperation. Thank you.
Я благодарю представителя.
I thank the representative of Norway for her statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Ireland.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Special Representative Hennis Plasschaert, for your briefing. You and your colleagues from the UN missions and agencies on the ground have our full support, and I welcome our Iraqi colleague to the meeting as well. Mr. President, we meet at an important moment for Iraq's democracy. Following October's election, we look forward to the timely formation of a government which meets the legitimate needs and aspirations of the Iraqi people. The first session of the Council of Representatives held last month and the election of a speaker were important steps in this process. I want to commend the valuable work of the Independent High Electoral Commission and UNAMI, including in the post-elections phase. Following its own electoral observer mission, the EU will present a comprehensive final report with recommendations to the Iraqi authorities later this month. Mr. President, women won a historic 95 seats in October's election, exceeding the 25% quota. As Ms. Amal Kabashi told this council last November, women must now also be full participants in negotiations on government formation. She also reminded us that significant barriers to women's participation remain to be addressed. We echo her calls for the swift adoption and enactment of the draft anti-domestic violence law and for the necessary resources and structures to be put in place for the full implementation of the milestone Yazidi female survivors law. Mr. President, regrettably, the security situation in Iraq remains volatile. I strongly condemn the recent attacks carried out by ISIS, including on the 21st of January. These attacks are a stark reminder to us all of the group's malevolent intentions and capabilities. There has also been an alarming uptick in rocket and drone attacks, including directly into Baghdad's Green Zone. We call on all actors to exercise restraint, and we echo UNAMI's message of the 2nd of February, calling for full respect for Iraqi sovereignty and territorial integrity at all times. Tragically, children are often the most vulnerable to the precarious security situation and to explosive remnants of war in particular. In the last year, over 100 children were killed or maimed by explosive remnants and improvised explosive devices in Iraq. More concerted efforts in demining and mine risk education are required. The safety of Iraq's children must be ensured and their futures safeguarded. Mr. President, we welcome 2 further rounds of returns from Al-Hol camp in December and January. We recall the obligation of the Iraqi authorities to ensure safe, voluntary and dignified returns, and to address issues such as a lack of basic services and stigmatization of returnees. I welcome and commend Iraq's accession to the Paris Agreement on climate change. In the face of significant water scarcity, as the SRSG has mentioned, the implications of climate change for Iraq are myriad. Climate change threatens food security, people's livelihoods, and progress on gender equality, as well as contributing to internal displacement. Joint action to mitigate and adapt to the challenges posed by climate change will be crucial. Finally, Mr. President, we would like to once again welcome the fulfillment of the mandate of the UN Compensation Commission and commend the governments of Iraq and Kuwait for their cooperation with the Commission. We look forward to further positive developments in Iraq-Kuwait relations, and in particular in the search for missing Kuwaiti and third country nationals and missing property. Thank you, President.
I thank the representative of Ireland for his statement. I now give the floor to the permanent representative of France.
Madam President, I wish first and foremost to thank the Special Representative of the Secretary General for her briefing and for the exceptional commitment that she has demonstrated in Iraq since the beginning of her mandate. I also wish to welcome here among us today the permanent representative of Iraq. France shares the conclusions of the Secretary General's report as regards the conduct of October's election. I hail the sharp increase seen in the number of women elected as deputies. This development is an important step in ensuring the increased participation of Iraqi women in the political life of their country. Madam President, as has been said by the Special Representative, it is vital for the stability of Iraq and of the region to put an end to the current political vacuum. France extends its full support to the democratic process in Iraq. The time has now come for an agreement to be reached on the appointment of a President of the Republic and to form a government able to meet the country's challenges and the expectations of its people. We reject any and all attempts to destabilize the country and any and all foreign interference. I insist on the urgent need to form an administration because Iraqi men and women have legitimate expectations of their representatives. They clearly expressed during the demonstrations in 2019 an aspiration for democratic change, for economic reforms, and for social justice. In addition, for greater transparency, these calls must be heeded. France also wishes to recall the importance of cooperation between the federal authorities and the autonomous region of Kurdistan on subjects of common interest, namely security and the issue of oil resources. Consequently, we call for the resumption of the dialogue which was established in recent months. The interest of federal Iraq and the autonomous region depends on the resumption of this dialogue. Madam President, the threat which Daesh represents remains significant despite the efforts of the international community, and we must, with constancy and determination, continue our efforts to fight against terrorism wherever it may be. France reiterates its full support for Iraq in its fight against Daesh and will continue its commitment to supporting Iraq as it contributes to the international coalition against Daesh. Against this backdrop, the protection of diplomatic premises, but also of the bases which house coalition forces, is vital. Moreover, coordination between Baghdad and Erbil on security matters is key in fighting against Daesh in an effective and sustainable fashion. Finally, Madam President, I wish to welcome the unanimous adoption indeed by this Council of the resolution of the 22nd of February last. This resolution put an end to Iraq's financial obligations pursuant to Chapter 7 of the United Nations Charter. This is a success for Iraq, Kuwait, and the United Nations, and it recalls that only the compliance with international law makes it possible to lay the foundations for lasting reconciliation and stability. I also commend the sterling cooperation that we've seen between Iraq and Kuwait on the issue of missing Kuwaiti nationals and missing third country nationals, and progress made in terms of returning Kuwaiti property. We encourage both states to continue their cooperation. Thank you.
I thank the permanent representative of France for his statement, and I give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Madam President. The United Kingdom commends the continued work of the UN Assistance Mission in Iraq and the work of SRSG Hennes Plasschaert. I also welcome our Iraqi colleagues in the chamber today. I wish to make 4 points. First, we welcome the successful ratification of Iraq's election results and the steps taken towards government formation. Condemn the recent rise in attacks against political parties and echo the SRSG's call for all Iraqi political actors to work towards a peaceful and constructive post-election environment. And, most importantly, towards a government that can deliver for the Iraqi people. we commend UNAMI's continued support to the Independent High Electoral Commission and to the Electoral Commission's post-election review. Second, we commend the increased participation of women as both candidates and as voters in Iraq's election, and call for the meaningful representation of women in Iraq's next government. We urge the swift adoption of the draft anti-domestic violence law as a crucial protection against women. Third, our collective efforts to secure the lasting defeat of Daesh remain essential. The global coalition continues to stand alongside the government of Iraq and the Kurdistan Regional Government to tackle the Daesh threat. The UK welcomes the commitment of the government of Iraq and the Kurdistan Regional Government to enhance their security cooperation to eradicate the Daesh threat. Finally, we thank the SRSG for her update on missing Kuwaiti and third country nationals and missing Kuwaiti property. The progress made on the identification of remains of missing persons represents an important step forward. We commend the commitment of Iraq and Kuwait to continued cooperation on this important matter. In conclusion, we call on all Iraqi political actors to intensify their efforts to support the peaceful formation of a government that can deliver for all Iraqis. And we call on the international community to be ready to support that government in tackling the pressing challenges it will face, in providing security, delivering services, reforming the economy, and moving away from dependence on hydrocarbons. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for his statement, and I give the floor to the representative of China.
Madam President, China thanks Special Representative Hannes Plaschart for the briefing and welcomes Foreign Minister Fawad Hassan to today's meeting. At the end of last year, Iraq successfully concluded the elections to the National Assembly, and the domestic political process entered a new stage. We commend the Iraqi government and people for their tremendous efforts and sincerely look forward to the Iraqi factions taking this opportunity to further strengthen their unity and build consensus on the way forward for political arrangements through dialogue and consultation under the constitutional and legal framework, so as to lay a solid political foundation for the realization of long-term peace and stability and prosperity in the country. We have a positive rating for the electoral support provided by UNAMI in accordance with the Council's mandate. At the conclusion of elections in Iraq, we hope that UNAMI will complete the finalization of electoral support as soon as possible and devote more resources and energy to supporting the Iraqi national development priorities. When conducting human rights and humanitarian related work, there is a need to follow the mandate strictly, pay attention to communication and coordination with the Iraqi government, and strengthen the screening and verification of information. Iraq continues to face complex security challenges. Since last December, the Council has issued 2 presidential press statements condemning the terrorist attacks in Iraq. The international community should stand firm in its support for Iraq to eliminate extremist terrorist forces such as the Islamic State and consolidate the hard-won achievements in counterterrorism. China appreciates Iraq's recent repatriation of a large number of its own citizens from Camp al-Hal in Syria. We also call on the countries concerned to shoulder their responsibilities as Iraq and to advance the identification and repatriation of FTFs and their families in Iraq as soon as possible. Iraq has repeatedly protested against foreign unilateral military operations in Iraq, and we urge the party concerned to earnestly respect Iraq's sovereignty and territorial integrity. China appreciates Iraq's efforts to develop good neighborly and friendly relations with countries in the region. We welcome the close cooperation between Iraq and Kuwait on the issue of missing persons and properties, and support the Council's press statement on the positive progress made in this work. 2 days ago, the Council adopted Resolution 2621, declaring that the UNCC had completed its mandate and deciding to terminate its mandate. This is a significant milestone in regional peace and post-conflict reconciliation. We sincerely hope that Iraq and Kuwait will take this opportunity to continue to deepen their partnership, actively respond to common challenges, and inject positive energy into the stable development of the region. Madam President, over the past 30 years, the situation in Iraq has been full of ups and downs, and people have endured hardships. Standing at a new historical starting point, the international community should firmly support Iraq in independently choosing a development path that suits its own national conditions, actively help Iraq rebuild its infrastructure, accelerate economic and social development, and improve people's livelihood and well-being. China is a sincere friend of the Iraqi people. During the most severe period of Iraq's security situation, Chinese enterprises remained in Iraq, providing the necessary guarantee for the people's livelihood and economic operations of Iraq. After the outbreak of COVID-19, China dispatched anti-pandemic expert teams to Iraq and provided multiple batches of anti-pandemic materials and vaccine assistance. China will continue to work with the international community in support of Iraq's efforts to achieve lasting peace and sustainable development. I thank you.
I thank the representative of China for his statement, and I give the floor to the representative of India.
Thank you, Mr. President. I also thank SRSG, Ms. Plashard, for her briefing today. I welcome the permanent representative of Iraq for the meeting. Mr. President, at the outset, I express my heartfelt condolences to all the families who have lost their loved ones in the terrorist attacks in Iraq, including the recent cowardly terrorist attack in Diyala province, which resulted in the death of 11 Iraqi security personnel. We strongly condemned all such acts of terrorism. Mr. President, the people of Iraq, despite facing economic and security challenges, have expressed their will through the ballot during the recently ratified parliamentary election. We welcome the increased participation of women in the election and their success in winning more than 25% of the seats. The critical situation facing Iraq now requires all parties to assume greater responsibility to overcome the current political stalemate. I reiterate India's support for the democratic process in Iraq. We encourage all political parties to work together for an early formation of a new government. Meanwhile, we are witnessing politically motivated attacks on leaders, party offices, and other institutions. Violence and intimidation should not be the tools for redressing political grievances. We urge all parties to reject violence and resolve their political differences through dialogue and legal avenues. In this context, the continued possession of arms and weapons in large quantities outside of state control poses serious challenge to stability in Iraq. There is also an urgent need for all regional actors to stop using Iraqi territory as a launchpad for targeted attacks on other countries in the region. A strong, stable, and sovereign Iraq would lead to greater security and stability in the region. Mr. President, the Secretary General's report of February 10th on the implementation of UN Security Council Resolution 2576 states that between November 23, 2021 to January 5, 2022, there were 123 attacks by ISIS on security forces, in addition to continuing targeting of community leaders and civilians. This staggering statistics is a cause of serious concern. The signs of re-emergence of ISIS in Iraq is a matter of grave concern. It calls for urgent action by the international community. Despite the success of the Iraqi security forces in combating this group, ISIS remains active in the country and the region, with its affiliates functioning independently at many places around the world. We reiterate our firm conviction that terrorism in one part of the world is a grave threat to peace and security of the entire world. The people of Iraq recently celebrated the 4th anniversary of victory over ISIS. Many brave Iraqi men and women have sacrificed their lives to ensure the defeat of ISIS. As a country that has long borne the brunt of terrorism, India is acutely aware of its human cost. We are confident that the people of Iraq would continue to be vigilant against the resurgence of ISIS or its affiliates. It is also critical that the international community and Iraq's partners continue their support and assistance to enable the Iraqi security forces in the fight against terrorism and build their capacity to address future threats. Such support and assistance should ensure the irreversible defeat of ISIS. The violations of Iraq's sovereignty on the pretext of counter-terrorism operations in northern Iraq must end. Iraq's neighbors should work with the Iraqi authorities to address all security challenges faced by them. Mr. President, we welcome the cooperation between the governments of Iraq and Kuwait to achieve an amicable solution to the issue of missing persons and return of Kuwaiti properties. It serves as a model of how countries can come together and achieve post-conflict reconciliation through constructive engagement. We recognize the significant support provided by the International Committee of the Red Cross to facilitate progress on this issue. We hope that all parties will continue to strengthen their cooperation until the matter is resolved to the mutual satisfaction of Iraq and Kuwait. Mr. President, India and Iraq have historically enjoyed strong people-to-people ties. India has always responded to the urgent needs of Iraq. For example, recently more than 30 Iraqi children with congenital heart disease whose surgeries were delayed due to the coronavirus pandemic were operated at an Indian hospital in collaboration with Iraq's Ministry of Health. As a steadfast supporter of a democratic, pluralistic, federal, unified, and economically strong Iraq, India will remain a willing partner of Iraq's economic recovery, reconciliation, and reconstruction. India will continue to provide its full support to efforts for peace, security, and development in Iraq. I thank you.
I thank the representative of India for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Mexico.
Yes,
Many thanks, Mr. President. I thank Special Representative Ms. Plashert for her briefing. And we echo previous speakers in welcoming the delegation of Iraq to this meeting. I will focus my statement on 3 points. First, the political transition. Second, security issues. And third, humanitarian assistance. The ratification of the election results by the Federal Supreme Court on the 27th of December has ushered in a new chapter in Iraq's political life. The incoming administration will have to tackle not only the challenge of implementing structural reforms, but also the challenge of rebuilding the people's trust in institutions. We trust that the political forces will reach an agreement to establish an inclusive government which meets the legitimate aspirations of all of Iraq's people. We are pleased to note that 95 of the 329 seats will be held by women. This accounts for 29% of all seats. We urgently appeal for this participation of women to also be reflected in the forthcoming ministerial cabinet. We are concerned by the many instances of violence attributed to terrorist groups, including Daesh. We urge the Iraqi federal government and the Kurdish regional government to deepen cooperation in the field of security and to promote in a decisive fashion the implementation of the Sinjar Agreement. Moreover, we urge regional and international partners to continue supporting Iraq's efforts in this field, and particularly those designed to strengthen the capacities of security forces. However, Mexico reiterates its concern at the way in which the possibility of invoking Article 51 of the United Nations Charter is being abused in the context of the fight against terrorism. We have taken note of the fact that around 1.2 million people remain displaced, and the fact that humanitarian organizations note housing and health conditions which are substandard as a result of financing deficits. The activities of UNHCR and the WHO to tackle COVID-19 continue to be of the utmost importance. My delegation lauds Iraq's efforts to promote the voluntary return and integration of Iraqi families, including 245 minors. These are people coming from the Al-Hol refugee camp in Syria, and we urge other states to follow in these footsteps. Finally, President, we recognize the specific programs of the WFP and the FAO that take account of the colossal environmental challenges that need to be tackled in a holistic fashion, particularly in the field of food security. In this vein, we congratulate Iraq on its recent accession to the Paris Agreement. Many thanks indeed.
Представитель Мексики.
I thank the representative of Mexico for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the United Arab Emirates.
سيد الرئيس أشكر الممثلة الخاصة
Mr. President, I wish to thank the Special Representative of the Secretary General, Ms. Janine Anis Plachette, for her detailed briefing. We express our full support for the efforts undertaken by UNAMI since our election to the Security Council. This is the first time that we attend a meeting devoted to UNAMI. I'd like to take this opportunity to congratulate the Iraqi people on the positive developments that the country has recently noted, and we namely welcome the holding of parliamentary elections in October. These were held without incident. We hail efforts made by the Independent High Electoral Commission with the help of UNAMI in the organization and conduct of these elections. Following the appointment of the President of the Parliament last month, the next stage, which is crucially important, will be the formation of a new Iraqi administration in order to make progress with bringing stability to the country and in order to ensure that Iraq remains positively committed to the regional environment and relations with Arab countries. It should continue to establish good neighbourly relations. Here we hail the role played by Prime Minister Al-Kazimi to strengthen Iraqi unity in the face of the various challenges which need to be overcome. Mr. President, Iraq continues to be subject to attempts at destabilization, and namely in the field of security. No such attempts should undermine their territorial integrity, sovereignty, or independence, and there should be no foreign interference in Iraqi affairs. We reject such attempts at intervention, whatever the grounds for them, and we insist upon the importance of ensuring stringent respect for the sovereignty of all states, and we say that all foreign interference in the domestic affairs of states must be avoided in accordance with international law and the United Nations Charter. This is vital in order to spare the region of all forms of destabilization, violence, and threats to international and regional peace and security. Moreover, we condemn the terrorist attacks perpetrated against the representatives of the Iraqi government, as well as against civilians and Iraqi infrastructure. Here we're namely referring to the attack perpetrated by Daesh in January in the Diyala Governorate. This attack claimed the lives of 11 members of the Iraqi military. We convey our condolences to the people and government of Iraq and insist on the importance of supporting Iraq in its fight against terrorism so that the country can retake control of all of its territory. The Iraqis' efforts in the fight against Daesh have borne fruit, and we must support these in accordance with international law. It is for this reason that we support the Iraqi position whereby it refuses the use of Iraqi territory for any terrorist attacks to be staged against countries in the region. Iraq needs international support in order to continue to implement development and reconstruction programs in order to strengthen the peaceful coexistence of all communities. Iraq has garnered positive results on all of these fronts, and namely in several regions that have been freed from Daesh. $50 million have been allocated by my country with the help of UNESCO to the reconstruction of one mosque and 2 churches in the city of Mosul. Through these efforts, we must make more progress with peaceful coexistence. We insist upon the need to support Iraqi women who have been the victims of Daesh crimes. the Iraqi women must participate in all aspects of life in Iraq on equal footing with their male counterparts, and this in all sectors, as said, of Iraqi life. Moreover, we hail the adoption by this council 2 days ago of a resolution regarding the compensation due to Kuwait. We also welcome efforts made to search for missing Kuwaiti nationals and third country nationals through DNA tests and other tests that have been afoot between August 2019 and September 2020. We must make progress on this file, and there must also be progress made with Kuwaiti property and the return thereof. Finally, we insist upon the need to respect the sovereignty of Iraq as well as its independence and territorial integrity. We will continue to support Iraq so that the aspirations of the Iraqi people are fulfilled. Thank you.
Я благодарю.
I thank the representative of the United Arab Emirates for his statement. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as the representative of the Russian Federation. We thank the Special Representative of the Secretary General, Janine Hennis-Plasschaert, for her substantive report on the situation in Iraq. We note the role of UNAMI in Iraq in stabilizing the situation in the country. We welcome the fact that the government of Iraq has upheld its international obligations regarding compensation payments to all claimants for losses and damage caused by the events of 1990. In this regard, we supported the final report of the UN Compensation Commission on Iraq and the adoption of Security Council Resolution 2621, terminating its mandate. We are concerned by the ongoing instability in Iraq. This is further complicated by the difficult economic situation in the country with the spread of coronavirus. We hope that the resources now freed up from paying compensation will have a significant impact in improving the well-being of Iraqi society. The international community, in turn, must lend support to Baghdad in drafting a package of measures to rebuild the country's socio-economic and humanitarian sectors. We welcome the confirmation at the end of last year of the results of the October 2021 early elections to Iraq's Council of Representatives. We trust that the parties elected to the parliament will agree on a candidate for president in a timely manner, as well as on the composition of the new government, garnering support of the main political factions and the ethnic and sectarian groups of the country. We support the desire to stabilize the situation in the country, including by upholding security and law and order. In this regard, we are concerned to note the ongoing high-level terrorist threat. Despite Iraq's successes in the area of counterterrorism, the security situation in the country remains fragile, inter alia, due to the increase in activity of terrorist clandestine armed gangs. We're convinced that the only way to effectively counter this threat is through as broad coordination as possible of counterterrorism efforts. In this context, we wish to highlight the work of the Baghdad Quadripartite Information Center involving the militaries of Russia, Iraq, Iran, and Syria. We believe that this mechanism plays an important role in coordinating measures to combat terrorism in Iraq and Syria. We intend to continue to bolster the military preparedness of Iraqi security forces, primarily through developing bilateral military and technical cooperation. That said, we believe it's crucial for all parties involved in combating terrorism in Iraq to respect the sovereignty of the Iraqi state and to coordinate their actions with official Baghdad. Once again, we reiterate it is unacceptable for there to be an illegitimate military presence in Iraq. The presence in the country of foreign military formation should solely be with the consent of the local authorities or based on a relevant resolution of the Security Council. We note progress in rebuilding mutual understanding and in settling pending disagreements between Baghdad and Erbil. A further improvement in relations between them would help Iraq strengthen its security, and a solution to the existing ethnic and sectarian problems would enable its economic potential to be tapped into effectively for the benefit of the entire Iraqi people. In conclusion, I'd like to underscore that Iraq must not become the arena for regional confrontation. We strongly commend Baghdad's position in favor of fostering good neighborly relations, and also we favor its diplomatic capacity to assist de-escalating in the region. Inter alia, based on Security Council Resolution 598 and the Russian collective security concept. I now resume my function as President of the Council. I give the floor to the representative of Iraq. Mr. President of the Security Council, ladies and gentlemen, members of the Council, at the outset, I would like to congratulate His Excellency, the permanent representative of the Russian Federation, on the Russian presidency of the Security Council. And I would also like to congratulate Mona Juul, PR of Norway, on her work at the head of the Council in January. We would furthermore express our deep gratitude to the Special Representative, the Secretary General and Head of UNAMI for her briefing. Mr. President, the Federal Supreme Court certified the election results that were held in 2021. It confirmed the decision of the High Electoral Committee, the independent one. This declared, in line with the Constitution, the first session of the Chamber of Deputies that took place on the 9th of February 2022 and saw the election of the President and the 2 Vice Presidents of the Chamber. The Federal Supreme Court is examining today the eligibility of candidates to the presidency of the Republic according to the terms of the Iraqi Constitution. As for the government, it is considering the ways and means to implement some of the binding decisions issued by the Federal Supreme Court. Mr. President, I would now like to briefly mention how the situation has developed since the elections in Iraq regarding security. The Iraqi government would like to thank the Security Council for displaying its solidarity and for its support to the Iraqi people through the 2 press statements where the terrorist acts were condemned by the Security Council. And in particular, I'm thinking of the terrorist attacks that we saw in December 2021 and in February 2022. We will never accept terrorism continuing to be an obstacle to progress being made by Iraq, progress in the area of security, stability, and social peace. We refuse the territory of our country becoming a theatre for settling of accounts or for political battles in the region on the pretext of combating terrorism. We would urge every person to respect the principles of the UN Charter, and in particular, the respect for the sovereignty of member states and the respect for the rules of good neighborly relations and cooperation and friendship. We would urge the Security Council to consider these matters extremely seriously. All member states need to be urged to respect these issues. Iraq has demonstrated its commitment to respect its commitments inter alia through the return of Iraqis detained in the Al-Hol camp in Syria. We've repatriated over the past 3 months about 1 million people, and they have returned to the Nineveh governorate. Today, they are being given rehabilitation and psychosocial services. Thus, a large number of people have returned to Iraq since May 2021, and 1,900 terrorists have been repatriated to Syrian camps. We are extremely concerned regarding the most recent Daesh attacks against some prisons in Syria. This has led to a number of leaders and affiliated persons to Daesh fleeing. We would urge the international community to strengthen its cooperation and step up efforts to combat the terrorist threat more effectively, in particular by member states repatriating their citizens who are currently in Iraq and Syria. The international coalition is not working anymore in Iraq, but we continue to cooperate in order to get assistance for the Iraqi forces, and in particular the Iraqi army, to strengthen its capacity to protect our territory and our democratic institutions. Henceforth, I would like to mention some Turkish violations. I'd like to do so now, and in particular of the Turkish parliament. It took a decision that violates Iraq's sovereignty. This decision shows Turkish indifference towards Iraq's efforts to build dialogue. We tried to propose different options in order to deal with the situation on the ground. In particular, we sought to take into consideration Iraq's refusal for its territory to be used to settle accounts or for other political objectives, using combating terrorism as a pretext. Concerning the liberated areas, the Council of Ministers is continuing to work to set up programs and projects in these areas to ensure that stability and security can be brought back to these areas. This is to help those people who are voluntarily returning to the different Iraqi regions and thus need assistance in the area of education, healthcare, and infrastructure. By the same token, the Iraqi government today does have an official database and has excellent statistics regarding the number of repatriated persons. We have also worked with different bodies to combat violent extremism. We have made reconciliation a top priority. We have organized workshops and training courses in order to build the capacity of young people and to make progress in the area of development in the context of a plan going up to 2023. We've also sought to make progress to rehabilitate liberated regions. The Iraqi authorities have adopted a number of rules to facilitate the work of non-governmental organizations in Iraq, in particular those NGOs that provide humanitarian assistance to our population. We have given 100% of NGOs our agreement to enable them and allow them to work in Iraq. Here, I would like to refer to the request that we received in December 2021 and also the request in January 2022. All of those requests have been approved. As regards basic services, we have been working to provide basic services in the area of healthcare, agriculture, education, water, and also other important services. We've also sought to ensure everybody has internet access. As regards Iraqi women, we are working to empower Iraqi women. We wish to provide Iraqi women with economic support so that all women be taken into consideration in all Iraqi budgets, be these the federal or local budgets. We are also organizing training courses and workshops to combat stereotypes and to promote gender equality. As regards how we're tackling the COVID-19 pandemic, the Ministry for Health has organized an awareness-raising campaign to provide assistance to those people aged 65 and over, and all those with underlying health conditions. The Health Ministry, furthermore, is continuing to make significant strides to provide tests, COVID-19 tests, and to continue to administer vaccines to all citizens, in particular through various government bodies, NGOs, and also universities.
To date, more than 8 million Iraqi citizens have received at least one dose of the vaccine. As regards the relations between Baghdad and Erbil, as regards this relationship, the federal government of Baghdad and the regional government of Kurdistan have organized meetings at the highest level in order to deal with a number of pending issues. By this, I mean the issue of the federal budget and the coordination between Iraqi security forces and the Peshmerga forces, and namely coordination also in the fight against Daesh. Moreover, the Federal Ministry of Finance has recently adopted 200 billion Iraqi dinar to be allocated to the regional government of Kurdistan. This is the 5th payment of its type, and it's being made in order to pay the salaries of civil guards, the fight against desertification and climate change. A project is currently afoot in the Najaf Governorate in order to combat desertification and to improve irrigation. As regards the relationship with the state of Kuwait, a brotherly state, we're working to strengthen ties with Kuwait, and we're doing this namely through providing compensation, the compensation due to Kuwait, which reaches $52 billion thereabouts. We are committed to implementing all our commitments as regards compensation. Moreover, the Security Council on the 22nd of February convened a historic meeting. At this meeting, we enjoyed the participation of the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Fuad Hussein. That meeting was convened in order to discuss compensation due to Kuwait following the 1991 invasion. My country has proven able to uphold its commitment, namely by
For this morning's slide, yesterday's battle, or last weekend's adventure, this Icy Hot's contrast therapy. Icy to dull the pain, hot to relax it away. Icy Hot, rise from pain.
The Great Atlantic Salt Deposit continues to provide a unique set of circumstances. I mean, the close to the port, but more than that, the actual salt is of great quality, homogeneous. We've talked about that.
1991, my country is staunchly committed to turning that page of the past with our neighbour Kuwait, and we continue to attach the utmost importance to the file on missing persons. And we do that within the framework of Resolution 2107 of the Security Council. We have worked with the Kuwaiti government and with the Kuwaiti embassy in Baghdad on all levels where the missing persons dossier is concerned. Kuwait recently identified the remains of a certain number of Kuwaiti citizens that were exhumed in Samawa in Iraq in 2019 and 2020. As such, 59 human remains were identified during this process and were returned to Kuwait and third countries. There are a number of cases in which human remains were not able to be identified. These remains will be returned to Iraq under the supervision of the International Committee of the Red Cross and with the help of UNAMI. The Technical Subcommittee, as well as the Tripartite Committee, recently held a meeting. During this meeting, it was decided that the search for missing persons was to continue and would continue through a humanitarian appeal, which was to be launched both in Arabic and English, addressing Iraqi citizens in order to provide all information available to them regarding missing persons, human remains, or Kuwaiti property, and namely the Kuwaiti National Archives. The Ministry of Defense continues to contact potential witnesses in this regard. We have recently held interviews indeed, with a witness from the Babylon Governorate, and we've also organized other interviews with the help of the International Committee of the Red Cross with other witnesses or potential witnesses. The Iraqi Ministry of Defense has confirmed that it was continuing its searches with local authorities in the city of Salman Pak. Moreover, there are other potential sites in the city of Samawa where we could potentially exhume the remains of 151 people. 89 human remains have already been exhumed. As regards the Hamisiya site, this is a site that could house 180 human remains. A request has been submitted to the International Committee of the Red Cross in order to obtain satellite imagery of these regions. This request was also submitted to the Technical Subcommittee. However, searches for remains have not been able to continue in these sites, and that is the way things stand at present. We have continued training activities in order to allow the exhumation of other human remains. And finally, Mr. President, I wish to thank the Secretary General for his support for Iraq. He has namely insisted upon the need to respect the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Iraq, and we thank him for that position. On behalf of the Iraqi government, I wish to thank UNAMI and Madam Special Representative of the Secretary General. They tirelessly support Iraq at a humanitarian and development level inter alia and have done so in over recent years. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Iraq for his statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. I will now adjourn the meeting so that the Council can continue its discussion on the subject in closed consultations. I would ask kindly all observers to promptly exit the chamber directly upon adjournment of this meeting. The meeting is adjourned.
Decisions set out in the document that I just cited. I see no objections. It is so decided. Are there any delegations that would like to make a statement following the adoption of the decision? Would any delegation wish to take the floor? If delegations have any purely technical corrections to make, I would like to invite them to send them in directly to the Secretariat.
There are delegations asking for the floor. La Turquie.
Turkey followed by Iran.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to reiterate that Turkey opposes the participation of Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime in the work of the ad hoc committee. We kindly request the Secretariat to ensure this intervention be included in the proper way in the records of the committee, as well.